welcome to our second Ask a NASA professional event, Ask a Flight Director. We had some great questions submitted by each of you, so we're really excited to get started. My name is Jennifer Reed. I'm the Education Coordinator here at the Challenger Learning Center, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Rebecca Wingfield. So Rebecca is a native of Kentucky. Hey, Rebecca. And we are so excited that she could join us today. She's actually the 92nd flight director in NASA's American space flight history. And I think she'll probably agree that this is a very exciting time in space flight, and obviously to be working for NASA. She has one of my dream jobs. I would love to be able to do that. And I also think it's really cool to mention that she is a graduate of the University of Kentucky. So you know what that means, Miss Melissa? Yeah. She's a Wildcat fan, so that's always exciting. Oh yeah, she's got her finger back there. So before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca and let her say a few things, and then after that, then we'll get started with our Q&A session. So Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. I love seeing everybody's NASA t-shirts. You guys look great. It looks like a beautiful day there in Western Kentucky, so that's my heart, where my home is. So I'm envious that you guys are there, but we're having a pretty good day here in Houston too. But thanks so much for having me. Like was said, I'm the 92nd flight director here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and for the history of human spaceflight for NASA. And I got to this job after graduating from UK. I came down and started working in flight control for the International Space Station. And I'm sure that we'll get to talk a lot about the International Space Station today.
All right, thank you. So one of our friends was not able to join us. Her name's Aveline Hennessy. And I wanted to go ahead and ask her question because I think a lot of people probably want to know the answer to this question. So what does a flight director do? What is a flight director?
Probably the thing that people think of the most is that when I'm working in mission control, I do all of I'm responsible for the risk management for the International Space Station. So what that means is when I'm in mission control, I'm surrounded by this team of experts that knows everything there is to know about the International Space Station. And if they don't know it immediately, they know how to go get it. And so we have all of this information that we can respond to problems or different operations that we're doing. And we work with the astronauts that are on board the space station to keep the astronauts safe and healthy and keep the vehicle running and safely, and also to achieve our mission objectives. So the International Space Station is also a state-of-the-art laboratory. So if you can kind of imagine living in the space where you both live and eat and watch movies and play games, and also where you work and do science experiments and learn and go to school all in one place. That's the International Space Station.
Awesome. I know a lot of people always know that. I mean, we know for every astronaut that's out there, there are thousands of people behind the scenes that are helping them on their way there. So excellent. All right. So we'll start with our Q&A session here, and we're going to get started with Emily Williams. So Emily, if you're ready.
Has anything bad happened and you had to tell the astronauts what to do when they got confused?
That's a great question, Emily. Have you been to the Challenger Learning Center in Paducah? Have you gotten to go there?
Yes.
And participate in the mission? Good. So you kind of know what I do, right? In mission control and as an astronaut? Awesome. So for me personally, like I said, I started out as a flight controller, and what my job was there was actually all of the maintenance on board the space station. So if you think about like when we need to produce oxygen so the astronauts can breathe. Well, if that machine breaks, then somebody has to figure out what happened, how it broke, and then how to put all the pieces back together and get it working again so that we can keep our astronauts breathing. And so I did a lot of that kind of work as a flight controller before I became a flight director. And so as the flight director, I get to work with the whole team of people that's putting all of that stuff together. And actually on my very first shift as a flight director, we had a problem with our communication system. And the crew was asleep. They were fine. It was no problem. But we lost part of our ability to talk to the crew for about 2 hours. We had some backup systems so that we knew that we could talk to them if we needed to. But that was really the first time as a flight director I had to look at a problem and say, oh gosh, how are we going to get through this? We got to be able to talk to the crew. We got to get them information. We need to fix this. Luckily, it was a problem with our systems on the ground, and we were able to work through that.
All right, thanks, Emily. It was a good question. Next, we have one of our local teachers here, Miss Ramona Patton.
Hi, Rebecca. And the question that I have, I teach in the science lab in an elementary school, and the question that I have was, if you look back at your early school experience, what would you have liked to have been taught in your science classes that might have prepared you better for your career?
That's a great question. I will say that I feel pretty privileged that I got a really good education in Cole County schools and also at the University of Kentucky. Looking back on it, there's definitely not one thing that sticks out to say, hey, I should have had this. If I'd have had this, that would have set me up for life. But I really appreciated just the love and support that all of my teachers poured into me. That's probably the number one most important thing. And I obviously loved science and math. Math was probably more fun to me because I shy away from like the biology and that kind of stuff, which you do a lot of in the younger grades. But the engineering part of math and science, I love. When I got to college, we started using a lot of Lego kits and the Lego Mindstorms and that kind of stuff. And I just wonder if we'd have started that a little bit earlier, I maybe would have known what engineering was. I don't think that I really knew what an engineer did when I went to college. People told me that I was good at math and science, but I'm not really sure that I knew how that applied to an engineer, to be honest. So breaking that down and putting piece parts together, I learned that my brain is very mechanical. My husband is an electrical engineer. I think we complement each other very well because I have no idea what he's talking about when he runs electricity through our garage. But I think all of those disciplines going together, and if I could have maybe broken that down a little bit earlier to start understanding what an engineer is, that would have helped. But I will also say, this is kind of a long-winded answer, sorry. I will also say that even though I loved math and science, I had really great art teachers and English teachers and humanities. And I think all of those things really, when you pour them all together, are really what makes a person successful.
Thanks, Ramona. Great question. Next, we have Alex Horowitz.
How do you time a flight so that you don't run into anything in the atmosphere?
That's a really great question. And the high level answer is very carefully. And there are a lot of people that are looking at all of the stuff that's in space all the time. So on my flight control team here at NASA, I have a group of people called the topos. That's what, because everybody has a call sign, right? They're the topos. And they look at their trajectories of different objects in space. And when we're looking at the launch time of a vehicle, we have to look at where the International Space Station is, which way the Earth is pointing, and make sure that we get that trajectory right. But then also, like you're saying, make sure nothing else is in the way. And there are groups within the military that also help us with where satellites are and where all the stuff in space is. Because as you know, if you go out and look at the night sky on a really, really dark night, you can see a lot of different satellites going over just by looking up. And so we got to make sure that we're out of the way.
All right, thanks, Alex. And I don't know if anybody got to watch that, but SpaceX here in our area, the 60 satellites just flew over our area. I think the 3 days, maybe 3 different nights we could have been able to see those. So pretty cool. Yeah. All right, stuff. We've got Hunter Courtney.
Hi, my name is Hunter. I'm from Paducah, Kentucky, and I would like to know, how do you work the robotic arm on board the space station, and can you show us the control?
I can't show you the control today because I'm at home, but there are 2 big ways that you can build the robotic arm on the International Space Station. So one is that the astronauts on board the International Space Station have a whole setup. And I bet if you go on Google and say robotic arm International Space Station, it'll show you what that setup looks like. But they basically have a joystick, right, like you would for a video game, and they have a translation aid. And they can use both of those things to go up, down, left, and right, but also pitch, yaw, and roll the vehicle. So they've got control over the arm in that way. And the crew primarily uses the arm when we're capturing visiting vehicles. So a lot of our cargo vehicles that are bringing up new food and new science experiments and things like that, they'll fly up and they'll get really, really close to the space station. And then the crew on board, the astronauts, will use that robotic arm to go out and grab it using those controls. And then they have a little, actually a little trigger on their joystick that they use to actually close the jaws to grab the vehicle. And then they'll bring the robotic arm in and attach that new module to the International Space Station. From the ground, we do a lot of the robotics operations, even when the crew is asleep, actually. We do a lot of robotics, and it's a little less exciting when you're just looking at it because our controllers on the ground are using computer commands. So on the ground, we don't have the joystick and the controller, but they have a predetermined list of moves that they want the robot to use. They've practiced in the simulator and they know exactly where it's going to go. And they send those commands up to the arm, and then the robotic arm will autonomously by itself move around the space station.
All right, Hunter, good job. Next, we're going to go with Henry Pace. So, Henry, you're up.
Which part of your job as a NASA flight director scares you or worries you the most?
You know, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. And I love your shirt. Is that a NASA shirt too?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool one. So the things that scare me the most are the things that we don't know about. So we sort of call those the unknown unknowns. So we know a lot about the International Space Station. We train our crews really, really rigorously so that they can respond to emergencies. They've got fire extinguishers on board. They know how to get into their return vehicles. But what really scares me the most is, what about this 20-year-old vehicle do we not know that maybe would happen at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and then we've got to figure out how to respond to it. And so we do a lot of work as the mission control team, just digging into all of the systems on the International Space Station to try to figure out what do we not know, or what's new, or what's different. Or when we bring up new hardware, we test it and make sure that it's not going to hurt the astronauts and it's not going to hurt the space station before we put it into place. And so those are the things that probably make my heart beat the fastest, is what's out there that we don't know about yet. But you can't stress about it. It's just part of the job. And you just keep learning more and more about the systems, and you incorporate that knowledge into what you already know. And we have a whole list of flight rules for how we operate the vehicle. And no matter what, we keep 3 rules in mind: keep the crew safe, keep the vehicle safe, and then achieve the mission. So those are the 3 things that we talk about all the time that really govern everything that we do on the space station.
All right, next up we have Alex Pace. So, Alex, you're up.
Are you ever confused by all of the buttons and controls? Do you ever forget what each of them do?
That's a great question. So for the International Space Station, it's a little bit different than maybe how you think of the space shuttle. The space shuttle had all kinds of buttons and switches and things you had to flip. The space station has more computer-driven stuff. So it has a lot more, or a lot less, buttons and switches, although there are plenty for the astronauts to flip and for commands for us to send from the ground. So do I ever get confused by them? I think the answer to that is, that's why you have a whole team of people, and people that specialize in their very specific part, so that we can keep each other in the know, and we can keep each other honest on what the right thing to do is in a situation, and we can talk to each other about ideas or which switch to flip when and where to tell somebody to go. So we use each other as a tool, and we use the astronauts that are in space as a tool as well. Because, you know, if we see something going on the vehicle, maybe we see, you know, a temperature looks wrong or a pressure looks wrong, and we're trying to figure out what's wrong. We can ask the crew members that are on board and say, hey, do you see anything? Do you hear anything? Does it feel different up there? And since they actually live there, they can be our eyes and ears and help us figure out the problem.
So definitely teamwork is a big part of what you guys do then, definitely. Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, next up we have Becky McCarter.
When did you know you wanted to be a flight director, and what would you say to children in Western Kentucky about pursuing their dreams?
I always tell people I'm the person that never grew out of the I want to be an astronaut phase of life. That captured me very early on in my childhood, spurred a lot by the fact that my grandparents lived down near the Kennedy Space Center, and I got to see a lot about space and see shuttles fly when I was a kid visiting in the summer. So when did I know that I wanted to be an astronaut? Probably not long after I became a flight controller. So after graduating from UK, I went down to Texas, came down to Texas and started in flight control for the International Space Station. And I don't know how to say this, but probably just about everybody around me knows that I like to be the boss. And so when we got into the flight control room, I loved my job as an operations support officer. I loved doing the maintenance part. It was very mechanical, and I loved that part. But being the one in charge to shoulder that responsibility and take all of the inputs and really see a team of people excel at human space flight, that's when I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I like to tell people, and I've heard lots of astronauts say this as well, and that find something in life that you're really passionate about. I happen to be passionate about space for a young age, and pursue that and figure out how to make a career out of that. And then that will help drive you into things that you love. And also to not just be satisfied to sit in one spot, maybe look for other opportunities and see what else is going on, and take in all of the opportunities that you can to help develop your path and develop a career. And maybe you'll wind up as a flight director or as an astronaut along the way.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Becky. Next we have Kane Hewlin.
What happens on the Soyuz spacecraft if the retro rockets do not go off 2 seconds before landing like they are supposed to?
So the Soyuz rocket, and so there's the Soyuz rocket and the Soyuz capsule, right? And so the Soyuz rocket launches the Soyuz capsule up to space. That's what has taken our astronauts up to the International Space Station since the retirement of shuttle. And that rocket and capsule have been very faithful to us and are really, really good pieces of machinery. They've been very faithful and very safe for our crew members to fly on and have performed really well. And what the question is about is what happens if the retro rockets don't fire. So first of all, I'll say I am not an expert on all Soyuz systems. There are teams of people, specifically my counterparts over in Russia, that know every single thing there is to know about the Soyuz. And then in my flight control room, I have folks like our visiting vehicle officers that also have spent lots of time in Russia learning all of the different systems that have to do with the Soyuz. Now, those retro rockets, what they do is they fire and they really cushion the capsule as it comes back down to Earth, right? And so that capsule doesn't just smack the Earth and hit it super hard, because that capsule lands on land. And so if they don't fire, which it would take several failures for it to not fire, right? Because there are different thrusters, there are different valves that feed fuel and oxidizer into those thrusters. Yeah, oh, you know all about them. 6, right? And so if those don't fire, then that capsule is going to smack the Earth really, really hard, and it's going to not be a very pleasant experience for our precious cargo on board that are our astronauts. So there are other mitigations that help keep the astronauts safe. There are other things that we do to help keep the astronauts safe. Their seats move a little bit. They have some landing bags and an uprighting system. And all of those things factor into what we call the fault tolerance of the engineering. And so we always want the spacecraft and the capsule to be safe, even if you have 1 failure or 2 failures happen on different piece parts. We want it to be safe for our crew. So if those retro rockets don't fire, it's going to be a really, really hard landing for the crew. And I hear that it already feels sort of like the wildest roller coaster you've ever ridden on, followed by a significant car crash. That's sort of how I've heard it described, the landing of a Soyuz. So if you can imagine some of those things not working, then it would be even more significant.
All right. Next up, we have Weston Miles.
What are the most important callouts and milestones in a mission?
So I think it depends on what type of mission you're looking at. We have, specifically for the International Space Station, we have an ongoing mission of having that vehicle. It's now been inhabited. There have been people living on it for 20 years. So we've had people living in space for 20 years continuously on the International Space Station. And its main mission is science and research. So the significant milestones for that are taking scientists here on the ground and developing experiments that can only be done in microgravity or simulated zero-G, and developing the hardware to be able to do those, training the astronauts, and then getting that hardware on board so that you can do the science experiment in space. And then if there's any piece part that you need to come home for analysis, you have to figure out how to pack it up, how to put it in a return vehicle, and get it back for the scientists. Now, a little different version is if you think about the SpaceX mission that just launched a couple of weeks ago with astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. That mission looks pretty different. So our major milestones for that were first, partner with SpaceX and develop a brand new spacecraft. So that's a very new thing for us here at NASA, is to use a commercial partner to build a spacecraft for our astronauts to fly on. And then we have to work with SpaceX to make sure that that vehicle is safe for our astronauts to fly on. And then we get ready for launch, right? That's the most fun part, is to see the smoke and fire. We put the crew inside of it and blast them up into orbit. And so then the next milestone would be, as we get really close to the International Space Station, we sort of have this big pretend bubble that goes all the way around the International Space Station. It's called the approach ellipsoid. And so when anything gets inside that approach ellipsoid, they're coming to the International Space Station, and we start doing our joint operations. So that's when we started doing our joint operations with SpaceX. And they get really close, and both vehicles are going 17,500 miles an hour, and they get really, really close and really, really close. And then at the very last minute, they sort of do a controlled collision. And so that is what we call docking, right? And that's how that SpaceX vehicle docks to the space station. And then we open the doors and let the astronauts come in and give them hugs and all that kind of stuff. So those are some of the big major milestones. And then if you think too about the DM2 mission, that SpaceX mission, Doug and Bob are this Friday. There's going to be a spacewalk on the International Space Station. So Chris Cassidy, who was already on board, and Bob Behnken are going to go outside and do a spacewalk. Also a very significant milestone. They're going to upgrade our batteries that get charged by our big solar arrays on the International.
All right, Rebecca, we've got one final participant, Jackie Cheek.
Oh, geez. That's my sister, y'all.
Surprise. So my question, well, first of all, I'm your #1 fan, but obviously I need to step up my NASA t-shirt game.
Yes, you do.
My question is, even though your journey as a flight director is just getting started, you have worked so hard already. What accomplishment are you most proud of?
Why you gotta do that? So my sister is also a Western Kentuckian, also a graduate from the University of Kentucky, and now is a clinical dietitian at the University of Colorado Hospital in Denver. So you're connected with Denver, Colorado also. So what am I most proud of? Probably, actually what I put in my performance appraisal this year was I'm most proud of keeping my 5-year-old alive. So even with all of the space station stuff, all of the things that I love about my job, my family is definitely the most important. So mad at you.
We're all very proud of you.
Well, thank you. As far as for work, I would say probably most proud of being able to be a part of a team that is doing research and making the Earth a better home for everybody.
We love that, and we thank you for doing it.
Man, you can figure out how to crack an engineer. It's talk about family stuff.
And I can promise you, she legitimately submitted her questions, and we had no idea that was your sister until after questions. So,
That's funny.
yeah. So she did a good job of keeping that secret for all this time.
Incognito.
Yeah.
Don't
Well,
be mad at
Rebecca,
me.
thank you so much for your time. I think everybody can say we probably know a little bit more about what a flight director does. We hear about flight directors, and we even here at the Challenger Center, we do those things, but not everybody knows the importance of that job behind those astronauts. If we didn't have those flight directors there and all of those thousands of people behind them, we definitely wouldn't be nearly as successful with our space flights as we are. So I want to thank you again for participating, and for everyone else, thank you so much for jumping on, asking those great questions, and we hope to see you guys here at the center soon. So thank you.